conversation. So this is my interpretation of self-love and how to develop a practice of it. So I think the first thing to really notice or consider is that like there's not a switch that's on off. It's more of a dimmer switch. And so allow your success to be gradual instead of on off. So we're not looking for success that, you wake up tomorrow and you're like, I love myself. It's more like, oh, I'm not as mean to me, or this is a little bit easier. So often whenever we're changing things, it's like, oh, I don't want it to be a black anymore. I want it to be white. But before it's white, it starts to be white, it has to stop being black. So there's like a gray space, and then it's that. And it's the same thing with change. You could also think about this as like a boat that's speeding in one direction. For it to go in the other direction, it has to slow down, then turn, then accelerate. So while you're looking at this practice of self-love, allow for it to be gradual, which is in itself a practice of self-love and a good example. And so to me, self-love is where we let what's happening be okay. And in many ways, that's counter to what we're taught self-love is. So I have these different areas of living. We've got adventure, chores, administration type stuff, healthy lifestyle, financial freedom. So we think, and in some ways we're not wrong, that these areas of life are where we demonstrate self-love. And it certainly is, but that's not necessarily where we start if we can't. So what I found in allowing for healthy practices of self-love, the place to start is up top, right up in here. So how do we do that? It's basically bringing your headspace to a place where it's not so bad to be there, and then ultimately to where it's actually kind of nice. And you do that by becoming aware of what you're entertaining thought and focus wise. So I'm not sure what your practice of awareness is now. And when I'm talking about awareness, I mean your thoughts. So sometimes we hear thoughts and it's just kind of like our voice on the inside, and we don't have a lot of space to really listen to it or prod it and see if what it's saying is real. So if you're kind of just listening to what's happening in your head as if it was, like the gospel, I'd start by just paying attention to the things that you're thinking and asking, like, is that true? So you might think something like, I never do that, or they always do that. And if you're caught in your thoughts and you don't have space for them, you sort of ride that emotionally. So you get mad because you always do that, or you get sad that they always do that because you believed the thought that you're having. So the first step in developing a practice of self-love is starting to pay attention to what you're thinking about. And I have this picture of trash over here and a train wreck, and just kind of like the U.S. is drawn to reality television and all kinds of drama. So is this melon. And that makes sense because the mind is a survival tool. It wants to figure out what's happening so it can avoid dangers. And so it thinks that the best way to do that is to focus on trash. So shit that's not working or shit that went wrong. However, and this is sort of like mind-blowing, so hold on to your hat, the way to actually lead results is to pay attention to what you're doing. So let's say that, let's make this really practical. So let's say you're doing some cross-stitching, you're doing needlepoint. If you're not paying attention to what you're doing and you're thinking about the needlepoint you messed up before or all the ways that needlepoint could go wrong, you're not really doing a great job here. And this is where we build forward. This is how we this is how we prevent this stuff, by actually paying attention to what we're doing. What's tricky is that if we've had some pain or lack, like experiences of not enough resources, our bodies, it's like our heads are like, we can't be here. This isn't safe. And it's not wrong. In some ways, like that's true. So people with like PTSD, and it doesn't even have to be like big PTSD, it can just be like little PTSD. And we all are some way, most of us are some ways are in some ways traumatized by our childhood, some more than others. And all of sort of Western culture is in some ways like traumatizing. And so here becomes this like uncomfortable place to be. And so we come up into our heads where there's a bunch of trash and a bunch of train wrecks. So one way to help you get here is not to yell at you about being here, because that's just more of the same. The way to get you to kind of relax enough to be with the needle point you're doing is to very simply breathe. It's like practice being right here. And you can do that by putting one hand on your heart and one on your belly. And you just kind of like stay with them until you feel them. And that helps you relax enough to focus on what you're doing. So staying with the needlepoint example, if you had like a really terrible needlepoint experience, it's hard to relax and enjoy it. So like if you've had some shit in your life and you're trying to stay present, like it's hard. Like it was scary to be there. So like you're kind of on edge. And the way this practice kind of retrains the nervous system and the psychology. So psychology can lead physiology. By that, I mean, if you think about something that's scary, you can stress yourself out. It doesn't have to be scary like an anaconda. It can be scary like, what if I lose my job? And then you start to have physical symptoms. When you take leadership of your breathing and kind of like feel your body, you can do that process in reverse. So I was saying like the mind is scared, the mind makes the heart race. But if you can kind of like slow your breath, slow your roll, then you can also change your psychology. So physiology and psychology go hand in hand. And if you can't lead up here, then you can lead down here. The other thing is to consider or begin to consider that this trash and these train wrecks actually had some gems in them. And that helps you allow yourself to be here too, because you realize that when shit goes wrong, somehow you actually sort of win. And it might take some work to kind of see how that's true, especially if it's something that's really hurt you or you're still not happy with. But generally, there is some level of self or awareness or compassion or skill. Like this always comes with this, as far as I can tell, which means if you're focused on the trash part, you might not see the gems. So the part in helping you kind of relax enough to be here is to see like this stuff wasn't like terrible. It was and it also has this. And so it just helps you kind of relax the reflex of like that like clench to take a blow type of thing. So I'm not necessarily sure where you are in self-love, but this is the way that I would start it. And it's just paying attention to like listen to what you're thinking up here, and ask like, is it here? And if it's not here, is it helpful? And if it's not helpful, really consider like, okay, let's say you're rolling through conversations you might have that are going to suck. Let's say you're thinking about something you did a while ago or something that could go wrong. When you're doing that, is it helpful? Sometimes we get so caught in these patterns, we don't even think to ask, like, is it doing what I think it's doing? And often it's not, which is so wild. And this practice, like I said, let it be a dimmer switch, which means you're not expecting to get it overnight, but you get it a little bit better, a little bit better. And a little bit better at first looks like not being as bad. That's a huge concept. So like better starts as not as bad. So you would look at the not as bad part and be like, well, it's not good. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not as bad. And that's going the right direction. If you have any questions on these concepts, or if this is something that you'd like to work together on, I would love to talk more about it. So I work with people one-on-one, and there is a process where we do an intake. Essentially, they say, like, this is where I'm at. And I say, okay, and I ask some questions. And then from there, I put together a curriculum, and we work together. I lead the curriculum, and so each week a person kind of shows up or does show up, and I do a presentation like this that's tailored to where they are and where they want to go, and we clean up the trash in the mind so that the person is free to be here and like do what they love. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoy.